message that I bring to Israel is this. You may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself.
But as long as America exists, you will never ever have to. We will always be there by your side.
Washington is being influenced by special interests. Our silence is so loud. Are you comfortable with that, Washington?
هل تندمين الآن لأنك اتخذتي هذا القرار؟ تخيلوا أن تعملوا في المجال الدبلوماسي لصالح الخارجية الأمريكية وأنتم من أصول عربية في ظل كل ما يحدث في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وخاصة في قطاع غزة. الموقع الإلكتروني للخارجية الأمريكية وصفها بالدبلوماسية الشغوفة، لكن الدبلوماسية الطموحة. وبعد 18 عاماً من العمل مع الخارجية الأمريكية اصطدمت بدعم وزارتها المطلق للحرب الإسرائيلية على قطاع غزة، وعندما أصبحت غير قادرة على التحدث عن حماية المدنيين وحقوق الإنسان وحرية الصحافة وحماية الصحفيين، قررت أن تنهي مسيرتها الدبلوماسية الواعدة احتجاجاً واعتراضاً على سياسة إدارتها تجاه الحرب الإسرائيلية على قطاع غزة. في عمر 7 غادرت هالة مع عائلتها مدينة الدار البيضاء المغربية لتنتقل للعيش في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، تحديداً في ولاية كاليفورنيا، لتبدأ حياة جديدة هناك. كونك من أصول عربية، هل لديك كان أي حواجز في الاندماج بالمجتمع الأمريكي خاصة خلال فترة الدراسة الثانوية والجامعية؟
Well, of course, it's a huge change in one's life to go from one country to another. And in my particular situation, we came around the time of the Gulf War as well. As an Arab American, I had to answer a lot of questions about the region. And I actually think that that is what began my diplomatic career, because I had to oftentimes answer for quote unquote the Arab world, but at the same time, I was very much American. And when I went back to Morocco, I had to explain America as well to Moroccans. And I felt a very strong sense as an Arab American to try to bridge and bring both sides together.
خلال تواجدك في مصر عام 2003 شاركتي بمظاهرات مناهضة للحرب على العراق. لماذا؟ لماذا؟ ماذا كان الدافع؟
Because it was the United States was going to go to war, and it was an unjustified war. And again, at my core, I have always been a diplomat, and I believe in resolving conflicts through dialogue, not through war and bombs.
درست هالة تخصص الشؤون الدولية ودراسات الشرق الأوسط في جامعة جورج واشنطن، كما حصلت على شهادة الماجستير من جامعة جورج تاون. وبعد تخرجها من الجامعة انضمت مباشرة إلى وزارة الخارجية في عام 2006. خلال وجودك في الخارجية الأمريكية، ما هي الصعوبات التي ممكن واجهتيها كونك عربية وتعملين لصالح إدارة أمريكية؟ ليس بالضرورة كل القرارات التي تتخذها في مصلحة الكثير من الدول العربية، مثلا ما حصل في العراق سابقا وما حصل في غزة لاحقا وما كان يحصل بطبيعة الحال في الضفة الغربية.
Honestly, it's because of those exact problems and those exact challenges that I joined the State Department, because I felt it was my responsibility to try to assist to bridge the gaps between the United States and that part of the world. My Arab American heritage, I believe, actually helped me. It wasn't up until this very last conflict, it was always something that served me within the State Department, because one, I understood the culture very well, I understood the language almost, and I was also able to relate to people.
إعلان التزام بحماية المدنيين في السودان. المحادثات المقبلة بين الجانبين ستركز على وقف الأعمال العدائية بالشكل الدائم في الجريمة. نطالب بإفراج الفوري عن إيفان وجميع الصحفيين الذي تم اعتقالهم ظلماً في جميع أنحاء العالم.
أنا متحمسة للعمل على تعزيز العلاقات بين الولايات المتحدة.
ما هي الملفات التي عملت عليها قبل طبعا 7 أكتوبر والتي شعرت بأنك حققت فيها تغييرا أو كسرت فيها حواجزا؟
I was a political officer and I served in multiple countries. And so I'm very proud of various accomplishments. The first assignment I had actually was in Yemen. And as you can imagine, that's not the easiest place to have your first assignment as a Foreign Service officer. Diplomats had space to do what we call expeditionary diplomacy, where we were able to use our expertise to try to really connect with people on a personal-to-personal basis. But unfortunately, with this policy that has been seen as so inhumane, absolutely inhumane, our credibility has been lost and it has prohibited us from making those human-to-human contacts with our counterparts throughout the world.
شكلت الحرب الإسرائيلية على غزة نقطة تحول جوهرية في مسار حياة هالة المهنية، خصوصاً في ظل الدعم المالي والعسكري والسياسي للإدارة الأمريكية غير المشروط لإسرائيل.
The message that I bring to Israel is this: you may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, but as long as America exists, you will never ever have to. We will always be there by your side.
وأنت في وزارة الخارجية، ما هو تفسيرك لهذا الدعم الأمريكي المطلق لإسرائيل في حربها على قطاع غزة؟
As an American diplomat that previously worked on various laws regarding arms transfers, including Leahy vetting, the United States administration currently is in violation of multiple U.S. laws, including Leahy vetting, Arms Export Control Act, Foreign Assistance Act. So this administration is willfully not only enabling this policy, but it is trying to use its diplomats to go around these laws and violate these laws. So Leahy vetting, for example, states that any unit, any foreign army unit that is alleged to have violated gross human rights is not eligible for military assistance. It is clear, there is beyond reasonable doubt so much evidence that gross human rights violations are occurring, yet we continue to funnel weapons to the State of Israel. In addition, there's the Arms Export Control Act, which states countries can only get weapons if it's for the legitimate self-defense.
As the Israeli offensive expands into southern Gaza, we're learning more about the use of American-made weapons by Israel's military.
The U.S. is sending troops to Israel for the first time since the October 7th attacks by Hamas last year.
President Biden has announced...
Why do you think Secretary Blinken always says Israel has a right to defend itself? It is to be according to this law. But everybody sees that it's not legitimate self-defense. It's gone way beyond the realm of self-defense. And for me as a spokesperson, I was asked to use that same terminology. Why? So that we're evading the law. I refuse to do that. I'm not going to be part of the State Department's administration trying to go around the Arms Export Control Act.
هل وصلت لقناعة لماذا قامت الإدارة الحالية بكسر كل هذه القوانين؟
For me, I thought about this question for days and days because in the pursuit of the decision whether or not I would resign, you can imagine that I was trying to answer this question for myself, and it was very difficult. As someone who served their country for 18 years, why is the administration refusing to shift the policy despite everything that we're seeing in terms of the evidence of the horrors in Gaza? And for me, I really boiled it down to 3 things. First, it's ideology. President Biden has stated that he's a Zionist and he has an ironclad commitment to Israel. But even with that, you have to ask yourself, is this really achieving security for Israel? And the clear answer is actually no. Secondly, I think it is institutionalized corruption. And this, for me, is the biggest, really the biggest fundamental issue right now, because Washington is being influenced by special interests. And I'm not just talking about AIPAC, everybody knows AIPAC, but there's a broader lobbying agenda, including the arms industry. And so when you have lobbying firms like the arms industry combined with others like the pro-Israeli lobby like AIPAC, it is a very lethal combination. So the politicians that are deciding whether or not arms get sent are profiting from sending these arms. There is no incentive to stop the arms flow. It's quite the opposite. And the people who are supposed to be enforcing the laws, like the Arms Export Control Act, Foreign Assistance Act, Leahy vetting, they're the ones breaking the laws. There is no clear mechanism of enforcement, which is a huge problem. Lastly, and one that I think has allowed all of this to happen, is racism. And I'm going to be very blunt about that. There has been such an embedded dehumanization of Palestinians, of Arabs, of Muslims in this country, and it's not just recently, it's been happening for decades, right? To the point where it's okay if those people die. It's almost expected if those people get killed. Oh, they're refugees again? That happens all the time. And it's almost at the subconscious level where people don't feel the same amount of pain when they see a child being killed in Gaza than they do when they see a Ukrainian child get killed. And this deep level of dehumanization is something that I think has enabled everything else to happen. But I do have hope that the American people are standing up and realizing what is happening, and they're starting to speak out, and we saw that, of course, with all of the student protests as well.
كيف كانت النقاشات في كواليس الخارجية الأمريكية خلال الحرب الإسرائيلية على قطاع غزة؟
Well, I can tell you, Jalal, I mean, you may be surprised to hear this, but many diplomats across the Arab world are opposed to this policy. They understand that it is not helping the United States. They understand that it's destabilizing to the Middle East and that it's actually not achieving its goals. They will tell you face to face how they feel. But unfortunately, one of the things that I faced throughout this last year that was actually quite devastating is seeing very good people that I know, people that I've worked with for a long time, others that I don't know so well, but many people that I know have issues with how dangerous this policy is, willfully enable the policy. And even though they know the ramifications are terrible for the United States and for the region, they're still, quote unquote, doing their job. They're not speaking out from within the system. They're doing things that even though they're uncomfortable with it and they know it's potentially illegal, immoral, they're willing to enable, they're willing to do it despite all the evidence against it. And I got to a point where I realized you hear questions from history like, how did slavery happen for so long? Or how did so many people allow the Holocaust to happen? And fundamentally, I think it's when good people stay silent, when they choose to stay silent. And that's what I experienced over the last year, that we have a genocide happening in Gaza, a genocide, an ethnic cleansing. And we have the evidence for it every single day. It's being live streamed on all of our phones. It's undeniable. The proof is there. And not only that, it's with American bombs, paid for by all of our taxes.
كيف تصفين تصرف الخارجية الأمريكية وتفاعلها مع الحرب الأوكرانية مقارنة بالحرب على قطاع غزة؟
Oh, it's been completely different, right? And as a spokesperson, I did many interviews on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and I had the talking points. And so one of the issues that I had was, why are these talking points so different? When we're talking about the killing of civilians, when we're talking about the killing of Ukrainian civilians, we use language that is so humane. Or, for example, when Russia arrests a journalist, we condemn, we speak out, yet when journalists are massacred in Gaza, we stay silent. I mean, the racism, the double standard is so blatant and so apparent that it is absolutely shameful. And to the point of freedom of press, you know, my country is supposed to be known for the protection of journalists, freedom of press. And when so many journalists were getting killed in Gaza, including, with all my condolences, the cameraman from Al Jazeera, I wrote...
Samir Abu Daqqa.
Absolutely, Samir Abu Daqqa, Allah yarhamu. I wrote to the department and said, our silence is so loud. Every Arab journalist hears our silence. Why haven't we said anything? We need to state from Washington, from a senior official, that the protection of journalists in Gaza is a necessity. I was initially told it's too controversial. So what do you mean it's too controversial? Aren't we the country of freedom of press? So I pushed back, and I eventually got from the podium at the State Department for them to release a tweet and a small statement about the protection of journalists and needing to protect journalists in conflict areas. But it was very weak by the time it was released. But it took so much pushback to eventually get that release that, again, that was one of the many things that occurred throughout the year that made me think the insanity of this policy is beyond, and I can no longer be part of this system.
نذكر أيضا استشهاد شيرين أبو عاقلة في الضفة الغربية، وحمزة الدحدوح وإسماعيل الغول، وكل ما تعرضت له عائلة الزميل المراسل وائل الدحدوح.
الله يرحمهم جميعا.
قلت بأنك رفضت استخدام مصطلح لإسرائيل الحق بالدفاع عن نفسها خلال عملك مع الخارجية الأمريكية بعد 7 أكتوبر. هل طلب منك مهام، وخاصة مهام إعلامية، بالتحدث عن حق إسرائيل بالدفاع عن نفسها وتبرير الدعم الأمريكي المطلق لإسرائيل في حربها على غزة؟
My last role was the first public-facing role, where I was the spokesperson, or I was a spokesperson for the State Department in the Arab world. So yes, I was asked and expected to go out and deliver these talking points, including Israel has a right to defend itself, including many, many other things. The issue that I had with those talking points is that it negated the plight of the Palestinians completely. It, again, dehumanized them. And so I fought back hard against the department, and I said, I cannot use these talking points. You cannot expect me to go out on Arab media and only talk about one side, as if the other side does not exist. I remember one talking point that I received that said, we stand with the Israeli people. And I wrote back and I said, you didn't finish the sentence. There's another part of that sentence. We can't pretend to be honest brokers when we're only talking about the suffering of one people. Of course, recognize the suffering of one, but you have to recognize the suffering of the other as well.
كيف كانت ردة الفعل عندما رفضتي بأن تتحدثي بطريقة واحدة؟
I had a mixed reaction to my refusal to do interviews. Some were supportive and understood where I was coming from. Some were very upset and insisted that I do interviews. Till the day I resigned, I did not do a single interview on Gaza, and I stood my ground because I would not be the face of this war. I would not be the face of this genocide. And I did not become a diplomat to promote a war. I became a diplomat to promote peace, to promote diplomacy. And this policy is fundamentally opposed to diplomacy. It is a militarized approach that is actually failing. It's failing everybody. There are no winners with this policy. Not even the Israelis are winning. You're seeing the families of the hostages protesting every day against Netanyahu. Everyone is failing except perhaps Netanyahu himself is perhaps the only winner at this point. But even for the United States, it's a threat to our own US national security. So when I refused to do interviews, I was showing Washington the reaction to the policy throughout the Arab world and explaining to them, look at the growth of anti-Americanism. Look what this policy is doing to us. We are being equated as a country, as a nation of child killers. This is how we are seen now in the Arab world. Are you comfortable with that, Washington? And the reality is that this policy in particular, unlike others, is coming directly from the top. That it was very difficult for any career diplomat to be able to push back on this policy. That is also one of the many reasons why I eventually decided to resign, because I realized that it was so concentrated at the top that there was only so much pushback I could do.
عندما رفضتي هل تمت معاملتك بطريقة مغايرة غير اعتيادية؟
That's exactly what happened. I was doing daily reports summarizing what traditional pan-Arab media and social pan-Arab media were focused on with regard to Gaza. So I would study everything from the region, and then I would consolidate and put together a daily report, a daily snapshot for Washington, showing them what people across the Arab world were consuming. And you know what they were consuming. They were consuming horrific images of massacres, of babies being killed, of children getting starved, and it was absolutely horrific. And a lot of times this would show US complicity, fragments of US bombs, for example, or complicity in terms of violations of law, such as Israel's use of white phosphorus, which is, again, a war crime. I would send these reports daily, oftentimes on the weekends as well. I would get feedback, oftentimes saying, thank you very much for your reports. They're going to the highest levels of our government. They're going to the 7th floor, which is where the secretary sits. They're going to the White House. So these reports kept me going for a long time. I felt like if my government only knew, if my government only understood, if they saw the reality of what was actually happening in Gaza, they would, of course, shift the policy. And I held on to that. I really believed it, perhaps naively. But I did not think that this administration would go this far. Unfortunately, they did, right? And we see the horrors that is today. Eventually, I was told in January that my reports were no longer needed. And I got the signal that the policy is the policy. And by then, basically everyone around the Foreign Service, especially in the Middle East region, they understood. And that really sent a chilling effect across the State Department, especially I can speak as a diplomat overseas. What I saw is diplomats self-censoring. They understood that, okay, Washington does not want to hear these facts. They don't want to know this level of detail because it makes us complicit. I actually know of one Foreign Service officer that left a regional assignment in the Middle East because he was also silenced, and he chose not to resign, but he left the Middle East instead. The results have been devastating because now you have the experts of the US government, you have the diplomats self-censoring themselves because they know this is not what Washington wants to hear. That's not how the US government is supposed to operate, and frankly, that's not how the US government has operated in the past. At least that was not my experience in 18 years. I've disagreed with US policy before, of course, every diplomat does. But what I've experienced throughout my 18 years was robust debate, robust conversation, and space to discuss. But this has been silencing. We don't really want to hear about that. Chilling effect, and almost diplomats worried about speaking with each other, which is, again, not supposed to be how the State Department operates. And fundamentally, America is losing. If this is how we're going to form our government, we're losing. We're not operating based on facts. We're operating based on political interests, and that does not serve the American people.
طيب ربما الآن المشاهد يسأل لماذا انتظرت هالة 8 أشهر قبل أن تستقيل؟
That's a very good question. So those reports kept me going for a long time. As I mentioned, I had the hope that they would perhaps help in some way, and I felt a sense of responsibility. I mean, I would stay up late into the night every day writing those reports, and I would agonize because I would say, maybe this is the image of a little girl that would wake someone up at the White House. Maybe when they see Layla and they see her body full of blood, they'll see their daughter. And I would strategize, which picture should I put today? Which story should I amplify? Should I make sure Washington sees? That kept me going for a very long time. But again, in January, when those reports were turned off, and other things happened that led to this, I finally said, okay, I think I have to. I don't think I can do this anymore. I had a lot of coworkers try to convince me to stay, telling me things like, well, if you leave, imagine who could replace you. Your expertise is needed. It's times like this when you are needed even more. This is not the time for you to leave. This is a time for you to stay. But when I saw that, again, the policy was not shifting, there was a lot of pressure on me as well to get back on Arab media. I refused, right? Absolutely not. And then I started figuring out how to resign, because you can imagine after an 18-year career, it's not a night and day thing. It's a very long process. And so I began to process, and part of that process was finding housing, because when you're a diplomat, it's not just a job, it's your entire life. It's your children's education, it's even the license plate on your car, it's your house. So I actually had to move my house. And I had to find new housing for my entire family, and that took a process. That was a process. So when that process was finished, that's finally when I could submit my resignation. And then I submitted my resignation, and I felt the need to speak out. Because fundamentally, Americans and others around the world, including in the Arab world, need to understand what this policy is. The fact that it is illegal. It's not just violating international law, it's violating US law. That is inhumane. And I felt a sense of responsibility as a diplomat that had served for 18 years to come out and speak out about this.
هلا فهمنا بأن الأمور عندك كانت تراكمية حتى وصلت إلى الاستقالة. أخبريني عن الساعات، هذه الساعات الأخيرة قبل أن تقدمي فعليا على تقديم استقالتك، كيف كانت؟ بماذا فكرتي؟
It was devastating. Sorry, I'm actually crying.
Did you feel like that before you
I mean, I
resigned?
literally was crying every day.
في شهر نيسان أبريل الماضي أعلنت هالة على صفحتها الشخصية على موقع لينكد إن استقالتها من عملها في وزارة الخارجية الأمريكية اعتراضاً على سياسة بلادها في غزة.
Honestly, Jalal, it was devastating. I spent practically my entire adult life as an American diplomat. It wasn't just the job, it was my identity. And I felt very proud of the work I was doing. I felt it was my duty and my responsibility to help. And part of me felt, am I giving up? Am I giving up too soon? But in those last months, it was a very, very heavy weight that I was representing an administration that was enabling a genocide. And I had a lot of mixed feelings. Very, very sad that I was no longer going to be a diplomat, and that was going to no longer be my reality. It was going to be my past. But at the same time, I felt relief. And I would speak to other diplomats, do you feel complicit? And they would also tell me they feel complicit.
هل تندمين الآن لأنك اتخذتي هذا القرار؟
No, absolutely not. I don't regret it at all. I'm actually grateful that I had the ability to resign, because some people feel like they have financial obligations and financial considerations that does not permit them to resign. Thankfully, I was in a position where I could give up my career, but fundamentally, morally, humanely, legally, my soul, my ruh, did not allow me to stay in this career. And I asked myself, where can you do the most good? Staying in? Is your voice going to be heard enough? Is your expertise going to be considered enough? Or can you make more of an impact by resigning and speaking out? Where is the greatest impact? And the way I see things is we have one life to live. I need to make the most out of the life that I'm given. And so when I realized that that's it, I hit a dead end. I chose to come out and speak out. And I think it is also my duty to explain to the American people what this policy is for them. Because as we continue to send arms to Israel with their tax dollars, with our tax dollars, there's a homeless crisis in America. Education is not being funded. There's a healthcare crisis. And so I feel, as someone that worked for the government for so long, it is my responsibility and my duty to speak out against this institutionalized corruption.
هلا أنت ثالث مسؤول في الخارجية الأمريكية يستقيل بعد جوش بول وأنال شيلاين، وأول دبلوماسية. ولكن السؤال، ماذا حققتم من هذه الاستقالات؟ ما زالت حتى اليوم الإدارة الأمريكية تدعم إسرائيل بشكل مطلق، وما زالت إسرائيل ترتكب الجرائم والإبادة الجماعية في قطاع غزة. ماذا حققتم من هذه الاستقالات؟
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Jalal. I can answer it in two parts. First off, it's us as human beings, right? And the fact that I think all of us chose to no longer be part of that genocide, to no longer enable it on a personal level. And I think that it sends messages to others. Obviously, we haven't been able to change the policy, and that's been intensely frustrating. But I know I can speak for the others that have resigned. We will not rest until the policy is shifted. The one thing that I can look at least, that is not a shift of policy, but at least it is progress, that now American citizens are starting to talk about the fact that this policy is illegal, because we as experts have explained that to them. Because an American, in California doesn't necessarily know anything about Leahy vetting or the Foreign Assistance Act or the Arms Export Control Act. And so we have made that information readily available to Americans. I also hope that broader, not just in the United States, but we've shown to others across the world, including in the Arab world, that the US government and US officials are not just this policy, right? And there is diversity of thought. There are people of conscience that are trying to push back. And we will continue to do so until this policy does shift.
كيف يؤثر الكونغرس وأعضاء الكونغرس على أداء الإدارة الأمريكية، خاصة في مواضيع تتعلق بدعم إسرائيل مثلا بالسلاح بشكل مطلق رغم كل ما يرتكب بهذا السلاح الأمريكي في قطاع غزة؟
Congress is a very integral part of all of this because a lot of the arms transfers have to be approved through Congress, right? And the problem is that the way our system is built currently, those same politicians are able to receive campaign contributions from the arms industry, from the pro-Israeli lobby. That is a lethal combination, and it has immense influence in the halls of Congress through campaign contributions, through other means. And so when it is these same politicians that are deciding whether or not to send arms, these are the people they're answering to, not us as diplomats, not the American people, but the people that are making them profit from this war, from this genocide. And so there is no real incentive to stop it.
هالة، كونك دبلوماسية، كيف قرأت الرسالة من وزير الخارجية بلينكن إلى رئيس الوزراء الإسرائيلي بنيامين نتنياهو بأنه عليه خلال فترة 30 يوم أن يعزز من الوضع الإنساني وإدخال المساعدات إلى قطاع غزة؟
This is absolutely, unfortunately, strictly a public relations plot and a public relations tool. Why that 30 days? First off, the US government has all of the information it needs to make the determination now that Israel is inhibiting humanitarian assistance from going in. It doesn't need another 30 days. We've had this information for months, and it's at the systematic level that Israel is blocking humanitarian assistance. When that's the case, the law, the Leahy law, the Foreign Assistance Act, does not say, wait 30 days before you implement. It says you implement. Once you have that information, they are no longer allowed to receive military assistance. Why the 30 days? It's right after the elections. So it is almost giving a false sense of hope to voters that actually really care about what's going on in Gaza. It's telling them, you just vote for us, and after 30 days, we'll do something about it. It is an insult to American citizens. It is, again, a willful violation of the law, and it is shameful. Because if we think about what is going to happen throughout those 30 days, right after that letter was leaked, which also, by the way, is very convenient because letters of that level cannot get leaked. They're very secure documents, so the fact that it was also leaked to me shows that it was for show. But we saw right after that the Israeli government announced medical organizations were no longer allowed to enter Gaza, including American doctors. Absolutely devastating effects. What is going to happen to the people of Gaza? We are seeing right now the siege of the north. No food entering, no water, no medicine, internet blackout. We're hearing announcements of mass arrests, mass killings. 30 days for what? For continued ethnic cleansing and continued extermination? In the meantime, Israel continues its illegal assault in Lebanon. It's shameful, it's illegal, and it's inhumane. And the American people need to demand more from their government and from this administration.
الآن وأنت خارج المنظومة، كيف تساعدين الفلسطينيين سواء كان في غزة أو في الضفة الغربية، وكيف تعملين على وقف الحرب الإسرائيلية في غزة؟
Well, since I've resigned, I've been speaking out as much as I can. And in the United States, media really plays the role of holding government accountable. So I've been working a lot with US media. This is the first time I'm actually speaking to an Arabic news network. And before this, I was focusing all of my efforts on mostly American media, some international outlets, but mostly American media, because really they are supposed to hold government accountable and to educate the American people. Because really the only way that I see this policy as shifting is if there is more that American people say in terms of no longer accepting that their tax dollars are being used in this way. I've been working with others as well, many different organizations, to try to help on individual basis and on some various humanitarian projects within Gaza and the West Bank, trying to do everything I can, because we can't live in a world where this is allowed. We really can't. It's a threat to all of us, and it's just inhumane. I'm also a mother, and I can't accept the killing of children in this way, in such inhumane, devastating ways. It's not acceptable. So as long as I can, I'll continue to speak out and try to affect any level of change I can.
هالة، كاميرتك أمامك، توجهي بالعربية بكلمة للمدنيين في قطاع غزة وخاصة النساء والأمهات منهم.
أنا معاكم، قلبي كله معاكم، ولازم تعرفوا كذلك أنه معظم الشعب الأمريكي معاكم، ونحن كلنا سنستمر حتى هذه الإبادة الجماعية تنتهي.